guys, I thought it was finally time for me to pop on here and give you my final review on the Anastasia Riviera palette. I've now officially done 14 looks with this, 10 in my 10 looks 1 palette that will be linked up in the corner. 1 in my first impression, I did this look, which will be in the end of the video, just like a 1-minute quick clip. And I also did 2 looks that I wasn't happy with that I scrapped for the 10 looks 1 palette, so I've done 14 looks with this. And don't get me wrong, the 2 looks that I did that I wasn't happy with was fully my fault, so I take full responsibility for those. So I just want to kind of talk through how I feel about this palette now that I've used every shade in the palette several times, and I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of the formula here. So let's first start talking about the packaging of this. Now, I am a huge fan of this. I'm not as big of a fan of the velvet that they have on a lot of the other palettes, but this I think is really nice, even though it is already dirty and I don't really know how I'm supposed to clean this off, but I think this is beautiful. I think it's very fitting for the Riviera theme and I like the packaging a lot. I also like the inside of the packaging with the blue, and I think it goes really well with the rest of the palette. Now, as for the mattes in this palette, I will say that there are definitely a couple of different formulas. I have heard and I have seen a lot of people say that there are pressed pigments in this, and it's the pink and the purple and the brown, and I can for sure tell the difference in how these apply compared to the lighter mattes down here, because the lighter mattes are a lot easier to work with. I mean, they are lighter colors, so they are going to be easier to work with for that reason, because it's going to be harder to pick up on any mistakes that you make just because these shades are so light. But all of the ones that are not pressed pigments are very creamy, very buildable, very easy to work with. They all do have quite a bit of kick up though, so if that is something that bothers you, you might not like that, but I feel like every Anastasia formula is like this. Now, I will preface this by saying that this is my first Anastasia palette since the Subculture, and the Subculture is the only other Anastasia palette that I do own, so I really have nothing else to compare to but that palette. So this is going to be my opinions as someone who's not very familiar with the Anastasia formula, and I'm sure a lot of things that I'm going to say in this video are very obvious to you if you have a lot of these palettes already, but like I said, there is a lot of kick up in all of these matte shades. And let's talk about the pressed pigments for a second, because I feel like these are a lot harder to work with, especially the purple and the brown, because if you use the technique that I normally use, where I don't set my primer and I go in straight with these, which is what I'm used to doing when working with a lot of indie brand shadows and stuff, because that is what I found works best for me. I'm having a really hard time blending out this purple and the brown when I do pack it on and try to blend it out. So I will say that those 2 colors probably perform a lot better on a set base, which is not something that I would usually recommend to anybody, because I find that pigmentation in the shadows that I'm used to working with usually shows up more when I don't go ahead and set my base. But with these 2 shadows here, I would actually recommend you do so. As for the pink, I didn't have many problems with the pink blending that one out. I thought that one blended out really nicely, and I also kind of felt like that one needed a sticky base to really perform its best and really be as pigmented as I wanted it to be. So that's really all I'm going to say about the mattes. I will say that all of the mattes are incredibly easy to work with, as in they build very easily. I will say for all the mattes that they need to be built up. They're not like the mattes that I'm usually used to working with, because I prefer super pigmented mattes that as soon as you put them on your eyes, they're going to really pop and be super vibrant. But these are the kind of formula that you need to build up slowly. Or you don't have to, but you're going to have an easier time working with them if you do build them up instead of trying to pack them on and then blend them out. Also, if you have any issues with staining, this pink shadow right here stains like, I don't even want to say the word, but I have had a really hard time removing the shadow from my eyes, which to me is not really an issue because I wear makeup every day, so I just cover it up the next day with more eyeshadow. So yeah, if that is something that bothers you and you don't wear makeup every day, and the next day you want to go out and not wear makeup and not have a stained eye,
you might want to stay away from this shadow.
It is said on the package that this shadow is not eye safe, which in the EU, I'm pretty sure that all of these shadows are safe to use on the eyes, but in the US they are not. So, you know, do with that what you want, but it is an eyeshadow palette, so obviously you're going to want to use them on your eyes, but just keep in mind that it might stain, and it probably will stain. Now, as for the shimmers in this palette, I am not very familiar with the Anastasia shimmer formula, so I am pretty sure that this is the same formula that is in all of her other palettes, but I was having a bit of troubles kind of building these up without them being chunky and without having a lot of fallout. So the thing is, like, if you don't spray these shadows, you are going to have a lot of fallout, and I'm someone who prefers to do my base before I do my eyeshadow. So if I don't spray my brush with these, I'm going to have shadows all over my face because I do prefer to have a very shiny kind of foil looking lid. So I do always try to pack on the shimmers as much as possible, but I can't really do that with these unless I do spray my brush. And when I do spray my brush, I did have some issues with some crumbling and flaking and just like them getting a little bit chunky on my lid and then sort of falling off and not looking that great. So I don't know, maybe I just need to work with these kind of shimmers more. And I also didn't think that they were as intense as I thought they would be from looking at them in the pan. But that could just be that when they are together with all of these other colors, they look a little bit more vibrant than they are on their own, if that makes any sense. But I will say that I do really like this shimmer formula, but you just have to be a little bit careful with them, and they do a little bit better if you build them up slowly instead of just trying to pack them on your eyes with a lot of shadow on your brush. So just want to be a little bit careful with them and not overdo it at first. Something else that I just want to point out, I don't know if anyone else is having this issue, but this mustard yellow did not show up very well on me. I don't know if it's because of my skin tone, but I just didn't really find this to be extremely pigmented. Like, I built on it and built on it and built on it, and it barely showed up. So, I mean, I'm guessing it's supposed to be used more as a transition shade, but here's the thing that I would like to just kind of complain about with this palette is that all of the mattes here are warm tone except for the brown, which is more on the cool tone side. And I find that having a warm tone crease with something cool tone to deepen it up with just doesn't really work for me. I feel like all of these shadows here just doesn't really go with the tone of the brown, but that could easily be just me and something that I'm nitpicking. But I kind of wish that this brown was more of a warm tone brown instead of a cool tone brown, or that maybe some of these transition shades here were more cool tone to kind of go with the brown, because I just felt like something was missing. And I also really still feel like a blue matte is missing in this palette to go with all of these blue shimmers, because I feel like that really would have made this palette. I don't care which blue you put in, just put in some kind of a blue to maybe replace this shadow right here, or this one, or this one, or this one. I don't know, but I feel like this palette really needed a blue. And this color story actually made me feel a little bit restricted, because when you look at all these mattes, there are only so many matte combinations you can do in your crease unless you go with an all shimmery look or you put shimmers in your crease for some reason. And I did kind of feel like I had to do that in my 10 look video, because there just aren't that many ways you can kind of use these shadows and still make your looks look different enough. I'm not someone who likes to do the same look even 2 days in a row, or really ever. Like, I don't think I've ever done the same look twice. So for someone who likes variety as much as me, maybe I shouldn't have picked up this palette. Maybe this palette is better for someone who is trying to get into color, who isn't super into color, and who wants to have an easy time making sure that all of these matte shadows can work together as a color story. Because that is one thing I feel like is really nice about this palette, is that all of the mattes kind of work together, and you're not really going to go wrong or get a super muddy look no matter what you do, unless you use the yellow with the purple. But I don't think a lot of people are going to be doing that. So in that sense, it's a very safe palette for someone who isn't super into like color theory and knowing how to mix colors together. But for someone like myself who love using different colors in my crease and who loves to play with different color combinations, this palette is a little bit restricting. And I do see why Anastasia did this the way that she did, but maybe I should have thought a little bit more about buying this palette, because I feel like there are only so many looks that I can easily come up with that sort of make sense without having to think out of the box to try to like create something that wasn't meant to be with this palette. That probably didn't make any sense, but do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there are certain looks that when you look at this palette, you're like, this is what I'm supposed to do and this is what they want me to do out of this palette. But I'm the kind of person who's like,
I don't want to do what you want me to do with your palette, so
I don't know. Those are just kind of my thoughts. And I will say though that I do really like this palette. I think the quality is amazing. I think it's very well thought out from the brand side, but as a consumer who is pretty picky with what I do buy and what I have in my collection, I don't think I'll be reaching for this palette that often, just because the color story is a little bit limiting for me. But individually, I think all the shadows are really good, and I can see myself using this palette with other palettes and maybe pulling in a shadow to complete a look with something else from this palette. So yeah, I think those were all of the points that I wanted to make. Now, if you have this palette, let me know how you feel about it. Do you feel like the color story is complete the way that it is? Do you wish it had something else in it? Because I feel like it's just missing a little something. I feel like it just needed something to be really like perfect, and I don't feel like this palette is perfect. But that is just my opinion. I do still really like the palette. I'm happy I have it. I'm happy to now know what the real Anastasia formula is like. And I think that's it. I think that is what I wanted to say. So yeah, if you haven't already seen the videos that I've made about this palette, I will link them up there for you if you want to check them out. If you are new to my channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.